always interesting to see how it kind of works. Sometimes it's yip, 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 yip. And then sometimes it just seems very somber. So must be a somber day. Joshua 24. We've worked our way to the conclusion of a book that we don't really know for sure who wrote the book. Joshua is certainly quoted at times, and there's been a lot of different thoughts. Samuel usually gets into this kind of a discussion, but I don't think anyone really knows for sure. But if you had to determine in your own mind, okay, what's generally in the book of Joshua, what would you say? It's all about the early church, right? What?
The conquering of the promised.
Conquering in the promised land. Go ahead, Nolan.
I was going to say the same.
Okay, right. So they get out of Egypt, they spend their time wandering in the wilderness, and then they complete the battle to which they're able to then claim, the land that God has promised them. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. Now this is a summary of, I guess, the impression that Joshua has of what's happened. He doesn't talk a lot about personal things that he's done or that he's accomplished. He talks about the things that God has done for them. Now, why do you think that's important? I mean, what he does here, if those of you have read the chapter, it's kind of like a segment in history from a certain period of time to another period of time. And then he decides what that ought to mean to us, or what it ought to mean to them specifically. Anybody have any other thoughts about that? Yeah, go ahead, Noel.
I think because he sees himself as an instrument
Okay.
of God, for God's purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's not really talking about his own accomplishments. In fact, what you find him saying is, this is what God did. God did this. God did this. And there's 6 or 7 times when he makes a reference like that about what God had done. Now, why was that important? I mean, generally speaking, I know when we're younger, and Larry Robbins would probably know this, that you generally are not that interested in history, when you're young. Except you, Larry?
Except my class, yes.
Oh, jeez. I just lost my mind for a moment. Yeah. Why didn't I? I probably could have slept last night and come up with that one. You sure you don't have to bail yourself out in any other way on that one, Larry? Okay, all right. So, almost everyone didn't like history. How's that? All right, so why is it important? I mean, this is something that I'm sure Larry could elaborate on that, but I'm asking you. Why is it these things that happen? Why are they so important? Go ahead, Carol.
Well, history has a record of repeating itself.
Okay.
And so if we're familiar with the past, then hopefully we won't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Okay.
And I think Joshua is very concerned here that they're going to do that very thing.
Yeah.
They're going to fall away and fall into idolatry.
Yeah, well, in fact, he actually says it's going to happen, which, when you think of preaching or teaching something, you think when he brings that up, right after he talks about all the things that God has done, and then he says, and you need to obey God in so many words, but he says, but you're not going to do it. I think, most of you, if you heard a teacher or a preacher stand up and say that, we wouldn't be all that, enthused. We go, well, why are you doing that? I mean, you shouldn't be so negative. And what you find in the scriptures is sometimes there is a place for what we might call something that we might consider to be discouraging. Now, whenever Moses or Joshua or other people along the way are presented with, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, based on what? Now look at the history. Based on what? Carol said, well, maybe it's because they might repeat the kinds of things that happen. But in this particular case, because of what God has done for you, then here's what God expects of you. That's a very simple pattern. And what do they usually do? They always say, we're on it. We're going to get it done. We're right there for you, God. And, of course, that's the way we often are, aren't we? We got great intentions about what we're going to do. And just a second, Mitch, I'll get you. And then, then they say, we're determined to be obedient to God. Okay, now, Mitch, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that, even today, we have greater blessings, right?
Yeah, sure.
Christ. And we have full understanding. But even today, we struggle, right? We stray. So it's a natural pattern of humanity. And the importance of life, reminder, trying to understand and remember what God's done.
Right.
So, Joshua goes through that here, but with the gospel, we have that so important to continue to remember
Right.
what we have and the lessons and the call to action.
Yeah, and that's pretty much, yeah. Go ahead.
And so that's what he calls out in verse 14.
Yeah.
Certainly the gospel and the apostles, the writers of the epistles, call that out as well.
Well, who we are is built upon historical events. We get it lined out here, but then we also remember when we look at the Gospels and how they're written, and then we look at the early church and how Acts is written and all that. These events are to improve upon us or make upon us something that says, okay, this is important and I need to remember this. I need to remember this and don't forget. Because that's what he's saying here. He goes through in the first section. Remember how this whole thing begins in regards to getting to the land. It starts with what? The promise made to Abraham or Abram. Okay, so let's look at chapter 24. Read down through verse 3. Vance, go ahead.
Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and called for the elders of Israel, for their heads and their judges and their officers, and presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, father of Abraham, and father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham beyond the river, and led him through all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants, and gave him Isaac."
Did you read verse 3? Okay. Go ahead and read it again, please.
Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, led him through all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants, and gave him Isaac.
Okay, the reason I didn't notice that because my translation has the Euphrates River, and so I'm looking there and I'm thinking, now, where was Euphrates here? It wasn't in there. Well, it was added here because the river was considered to be, we might think it might be the Jordan. That was certainly very, very significant to these people, but it was from beyond that area because the Euphrates is east of the land, but this is where they originated, or he originated, Abraham's father, and they were what? Believers in God? Believers in God's is what they were idolaters. And this is always kind of one of these confusing points that people have because he is such an example, Abram and Abraham is. It just doesn't really make sense to us that God would pick this guy out or pick this family out, and this guy comes from a family of idolaters. But God does something with him. The one thing that we know is when God told him to get up and go, what did he do? He got up and he went. And so that right there is the indicator we have that obviously he knew something about Yahweh, and he was obedient to him. And I think when one looks at this, that's what happens. And in verse 4, let's see, Clay, go ahead and read 4 down through, read 4 through 6.
To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave
Now, what's really important to Joshua is that these people know where they're from and where they're going. And he now uses a phrase here, that just 2 or 3 little words, when it says he says, verse 3, I took your father Abraham beyond the Euphrates River. Now, he is involved in the bringing through all of these people that he knows about up to this point in time. God is the one who brought them to where they are. Okay, now, how is that supposed to be motivating to them? I don't know. Let's see.
Well, every time he did that, it was for the betterment of his people.
Yeah, that's true. But he did it. That's the important. I don't know that they always thought it was a good thing for them, but it was for their welfare. But the thing is that he's trying to set it up to where he wants them to know that they are where they are. And where are they right now in terms of their history?
Best ever.
Well, best ever. They've defeated. They've got the land. They've defeated all those the tribes that were there, and it's like a new life for them. They finally got back to their land after hundreds of years. That's where they are. And he wants them to know how they got there. That's what that's all about. Because, I mean, it's very easy for us, even though we know, I'll get you in a second, Jessica, that we know that God does it. And those people, who's the tangible people? Who's the most tangible one coming out of Egypt? Moses. And so it would be easy to say Moses has done this. It would be just as easy to say Joshua has done this. But God here, as Joshua preaches his sermon, so to speak, he's saying, we want you to know that we are where we are. We have had the success that we have had, and it's because of God. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't have anything to do. I know we seem to stress this often because let's think about this. We'll just throw the idea of grace in here. Were these people, as they moved along, were they being saved by grace? Even though God kept saying, you are to be obedient? Yeah, of course. How did they get to where they were? Did they deserve it, to use our terminology? No. But God selected them. And again, when you think about his selection of Terah, Abram's father, what did he do to deserve this? Well, he hadn't done anything, really. He brought a son into existence, if you will. And actually, probably the most significant person in this whole thing is, of course, Jacob. Okay, go ahead, Jessica.
Well, the thought I was having is that he's telling them this is where we are now, because this is the first time they're living in the land as owners and conquerors.
Yeah.
All the other times that the people have lived in the land, they've been sojourners.
Yeah.
Jacob did and Abraham did buy property there, but it wasn't for a long-term thing.
Right.
But this is the first time that they didn't buy the property, they
Right.
conquered it, and they're now, as a nation, they're firmly established.
Yeah, and so at least they have the opportunity now to make good out of what they have received. But how are most of us? I'll get to you, Nolan, and then Ian. But what we tend to do is we move on. I heard some guy saying that I was watching one of the series on baseball, the history of baseball, and was talking about how that every 20 years in America we're just changing. We're just changing. The only thing that is constant is baseball. And we do. We shake it up a lot, and there's a lot of differences. And so, you'd think right then and there, after all they had done, it would be, okay, we're here, let's obey God. And he did it, he brought us here. But that's not the way life works, because life happens, and so does evil. Okay, go ahead, Nolan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that how long-suffering God was with them.
Yeah,
At one point, he wanted to destroy them.
yeah,
Moses pleaded with him.
yeah. You kind of think if they would just keep that kind of thought within themselves, that this would be a done deal. But again, how things work, we forget. Go ahead, Ian.
It appears that with the language
Yeah.
there's this constant comparison and contrast. And it's focused on what the Lord does. So you have the people are in a state of some kind, and it's typically a bad one that they attack or
Particularly what now?
a bad one.
Okay.
They're being attacked, distressed, whatever.
Sure.
And then what is it? I struck down the Egyptians.
Sure.
I handed over your enemies. I sent Moses and Aaron. I did. So the Lord
Right.
is doing the action to relieve them from this bad state, move them to a better state.
Sure.
Constant. And so this comparison and contrast continues and climaxes at the end, where it's saying, you now have a choice. You can continue with me, the Lord, who has done all of this.
Yeah, okay, don't get ahead of us. Raise your hand when you think I've got to that point, because I want you to summarize that. I can see you've got a good thought going there. All right, so he keeps telling them, look what you got. And then, of course, they're like us. We forget. And of course, that helps us to understand the significance of why this story gets told. You know, when we sing the song, "Tell Me the Story of Jesus," it's not because it's not a nice tune. It's because we need to be reminded of the story of Jesus. So that we know, when we start thinking about why we are where we are, we're only alive, we only exist because God has given us life. That's the start of it all. You got that look in your face, Joshua? Yeah. Joshua. I just gave you a promotion. But go ahead, Justin. Yeah. Okay, so you were just kind of agreeing. Okay.
Now wheels are turning in my head.
Oh.
I was just thinking, a lot of people would say that about God today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
He's gone. He left. He's gone. He has
yeah.
no involvement in your life.
That's said often. In fact, I think of most people that have had their roots in Western civilization, they pretty much have come to that conclusion. Many of them. In fact, most of them. You know, we don't need God. We've gone beyond that. And of course, he's trying to remind them that he really, when we get to verse 14, which has already been alluded to, and Ian has hit on it, there's going to be a choice. You're going to have a choice to make, and you're going to have to make a decision what you're going to do. Okay, so let's go on down. Since your voice is warmed up, Ian, let's go ahead and read verse 8 down through verse 10, please.
Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites who live east of Jordan. They fought with you, but I hand-promoted you. You conquered their land, and I destroyed them before you, or from before you. Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, launched an attack against Israel. He summoned Balaam, son of Beor, to call down judgment on you. I refused to respond to Balaam. He kept prophesying good things about you, and I rescued you from his power.
So, not only does God protect them and God provide for them the land, he also helps them through two particular countries, the Amorites and the Moabites, who are out in places south and east from where the promised land is, and they were really problematic for the people of Israel. And God helped them in that regard. God helped defeat those individuals. The king told Balak said, go and curse these people. And what's the wording here? I don't think we've gotten that far down. Yeah, we have. The Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose up and fought against Israel, and he sent messengers and summoned Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. And so I love the way it's... Go ahead and read verse 10 and 11 again. Just do 10, Ian. Do it again.
I refused to respond to Balaam. He kept prophesying good things about you, and I rescued you from his power.
Yeah, okay. So Balaam, I think probably the way his character seems to develop, and it's not real great, I have no doubt that he probably took a little credit for this. And but he's reminding the people that I helped you, And then this central event, which is in the book of Joshua, about Balaam. God says, I did that. I did that for you. I did it because you're special for a reason. You may not understand it. You may not know it. But I chose you. And I took care of you. All right, so, and then he goes on down, and then what's the first place, what's their first victory when they go into the land? Jericho. All right, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to flip back again to look to verse 1, because he gathered them all in Shechem. Now, do you remember where the sanctuary was, the tabernacle? Shiloh. It wasn't in Shechem, but it wasn't that far. So this is another one of those scholarly quests that people go on, oh boy, I thought Shiloh was headquarters. And then he goes over to Shechem. Why would that be? Well, nobody knows. It wasn't that far away. I think when I was reading, it's only about 8 to 10 miles away. But those are things that I think most people find interesting. I do, because you would think naturally that Shiloh was the place where it was going to be, but it wasn't. That's what God chose, and so that's why I didn't see anywhere where God questioned them. But anyway, it gets us through down there in verse 11. All the ites, as I call them, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, and the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. He says, then I handed them over to you. Again, isn't that interesting how he puts that? Then I handed them over to you. All these people who, in this particular case, didn't want you to get there. And I was there with you. And, of course, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Joshua is sharing that with them so they will know that we have accomplished what we have accomplished because of God. And even though we may think that because of the times in which they lived, it should have been so much easier for them, to not forget God. And we sometimes say that because we think we have so much going on and the world's different now. No wonder we all forget it. It's just the way people are, and that's one of the things that Joshua's going to get to. As he gets down here, he kind of has this crescendo, the point where in verse 14, he will now say, okay, that's the information. That's what should motivate you to go in, live in the land, serve God. And so let's see and consider what you're going to do. In verse 13, he says, and I gave you a land on which you had not labored, meaning you didn't get it. I got that for you. And cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Okay, I got you there. It was all kind of set up for you, is the way he seems to present it there. Ready. I mean, it is truly that land of milk and honey. And so now he presents it to them. Here's all the evidence. Here's what God has done. All right, Ian, go ahead now and read verse 14 and make whatever comment you want to about that, based on what you had said earlier. I know that's putting pressure on you because I'm asking you to remember what you said. And I know what that's like for me.
Now obey the Lord and worship him with integrity and loyalty. Put aside the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates in Egypt and worship the Lord. Again, just kind of drawing on that theme of the comparison and contrast. It's the people have been this constant depraved state where it's like they can't do anything, and yet God is continually, I will do this for you. I will do this for you. I will do this. I will
And he did do it for
and
them.
he did it.
Yeah.
It's a promise as well as fulfillment.
Yeah.
Accomplishes everything for them by his hand, and now he is, in a sense, let them loose and said, I want you to remember this now because it's now time for you to choose.
Yeah.
Who will you serve?
Right.
Are you going to serve me who has cared and accomplished all of
Okay, we're at a place here where now you're going to have to decide.
And so it's again that comparison.
Yeah.
You want, the Almighty Creator, the infinite actor, if you will,
Yeah.
or something that's worthless.
Yeah, right. And so that's a pretty significant time. So we got to remember that in this text, this verse, although it's very easily applied to life as it is for most of us, but it's very much, this is a very specific thing. We are now here. I've given you the land. Now you have a choice. Now what are you going to choose? Have you ever had anyone ask you to make that kind of decision? Anybody here as a parent, have you ever given that kind of almost ultimatum to your children? No one wants to confess it because we
Randy, when you have children that are becoming adults and deciding which path they want to choose, I think every parent has to sit down with that says, you can continue to live the good life in my house.
Yeah,
where
right.
we pay all the bills.
Okay.
And feed you and all the things.
Yeah.
And go to school. Or you have the choice to do it on your own.
Right.
Move out.
I think it's very parallel to what it's happened. Now they may not sit down as you're telling them that. They might want to run and get out of the room, which would be something that one might expect someone to do, or maybe you did it. I don't know, but he's just saying we've come to a very, very important point. We have defeated all those people because they were what? Idolatrous. They had to go. We had to empty them out because they would turn us in the wrong direction. So he's really making that very clear. Now, they've already kind of goofed this up to a certain degree in that they didn't get everybody out that God wanted them to get. Janine, you're just going to, go ahead. I know you can talk. I know you, so say, I'm over here, Randy. I mean, I'm thinking, Vance is over there, and I wasn't sure if he was going to put a crown on top of Margot's head. Did you feel it, Margot? Go ahead, Janine.
When you've been through the Bible, this stands out as God having used Abraham, having used Moses, and having used Joshua to keep his people together for his pattern and to bring it through. And this is something that you don't forget when you study this and you
Sure.
see what is happening through time.
Yeah, it's not the kind of thing that you should even consider, someday I'll get beyond this Abraham, through all the people that come through. Yeah, it's a very important thing because it's about the essence of what the gospel is going to be. That land is going to be there for the Messiah to come from. That was its true purpose. And so here it is in this situation. This is where, verse 14. Read it again, Ian, please, and add 15 to it.
Now obey the Lord and worship him with integrity and loyalty. Put aside the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and worship the Lord. If you have no desire to worship the Lord, choose today whom you will worship, whether it be the gods whom your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But I and my family will worship the Lord.
Okay, so I know what I'm going to do. And I know what you've experienced, and I know what you should do. I know what's happened. I understand it. I was a very important cog in the whole operation. But given all these facts, going back to Terah, to when they finally won their last battle, he's asking a question that, that's kind of almost rhetorical. I mean, it's one of those questions that, what would you say to that? So, does anyone have any translation there that reads a little bit different there in verse 15? What's that, Dan? Okay, so read it nice and loud, please.
And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your father served that were on the other side of
Okay, so it says, he kind of puts this into a place where it says, okay, is it possible that you might not want to serve God after all these things that I've said? And of course, what he's going to say is that you're not going to do it. But of course, what I said is that most of us, when we're kind of given the invitation, so to speak, in our own mind, our own life, and all things are ready, come to the feast. Man, I'm ready to go, ready to go. And then it doesn't take much to kind of upset us. Go ahead, Dan.
I think part of the point here is that you get to choose.
Yeah.
And if you are foolish enough not to choose what obviously is better, if you
Yeah.
get to do that.
Yeah, that's right. It is your choice, and it's almost illogical that you would take answer. Yeah, right. Go ahead, Robert. No, I'll get Robert, and then, or were you holding up your hand for Vance?
I was holding up my hand.
Oh, okay.
I highlighted to me in verse 15, the big point for me is, as for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord.
Right.
Because it is not just, we look at it as a great declaration of Joshua's faith and the kind of leader he is, but there's something else there that I think has a lot of application for us, which is that statement is, it doesn't matter what all of you do. The entire nation can turn away from God. But what I'm going to do, what my house is going to do, is we will follow God, even if everyone else abandons us, even if the entire world turns against God. I am committed, my household is committed. I will follow God. I don't care what you have to say. I will do what is right, and I will follow the Lord.
Okay, I believe that's there, but I want to make sure we understand in the context.
Yes.
I realize it has a greater meaning, and it's important for us to know that. But I think he's presented this in a way to where I don't care what other people are doing. I don't care just whatever the drag is on you. It makes no sense to not follow God if you know the history. Go ahead, Vance.
Just to drive the point home of like, this land is not your own, something I really just kind of noticed is like, it actually even says it's the Amorite land that you're living in.
Yeah.
And were it not for God, you wouldn't be here. And so, it's always kind of every time I read this verse, I go to the very end, right, where there's a big statement.
Yeah.
Just prior to that, I never really noticed, like, even Joshua himself would kind of just throw that in there, like, this isn't even your land.
Yeah.
Granted, it's to fulfill the promise of God.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you might want to continue to serve the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole idea of his saying, if you're disagreeable to this whole concept, well then, go ahead, go and to do what Christine said. At some point, you don't have to call it an ultimatum. It's just that, make up your mind. This is the way it's going to be. And this is the way it should be for you. And then, of course, we see, what we can take from that passage, because we know, like Robert's saying, we know when we are at that place or when other people are at that place. We just have to realize that all the draw may be there, but we're going to do what's right. Does that sound good, Robert? Is that good enough? Okay. Go ahead.
I just think it's interesting how he just laid out all the things that have happened since Abraham to here, and children of Israel or even their fathers, none of this happened of their own volition.
Yeah.
All this happened.
Well, that's
even
right.
Then, God had to get
That's
them,
what the first 14 verses is really saying, isn't it?
right.
Yeah.
And God had to get them kicking and screaming practically
Yeah.
to get here. And I think one verse in actually 2 Chronicles 25, 15, 16 encapsulates this. And this is King Amaziah. He fought against the children of the Edomites, and he said,
James, could you just turn around and point toward everybody else and read that?
okay.
Okay.
So chapter 26, 25, 15 through 16. Therefore the anger of the Lord was, starting 14. Now it was so after Amaziah came from the slaughter of the Edomites that he brought the gods of the people of Seir, set them up to be his gods, and bowed down before them, and burnt incense to them. Therefore the anger of the Lord was aroused against Amaziah, and he sent him a prophet who said to him, why have you sought the gods of the people which could not rescue their own people from your hand?
Yeah. And that's demonstrated a lot, isn't it? We could probably think of Elijah, that's another example.
Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
And it's just, so all this, so God's laying out this logical, rational
Yeah.
argument. It's like, I did all this. The Egyptians in there, who was a
Right.
gods couldn't do anything.
Sure.
And these guys who were numerous.
Yeah, as we rolled from west to east, so to speak.
And then you get to Canaan, and you had a whole bunch of you children of Israel who were frightened of these giants.
Yeah.
With their powerful gods. And so why would you?
Yeah. Okay.
It defies logic.
So
Why
it
would
is.
you want to serve them?
I think, and if it's disagreeable in your sight, I love that. Go ahead, Larry.
I'm just going to remark that instead of it being a or situation, either serve God or these people, the problem seemed to be that they want to do both. They want to serve God and these others.
Yeah, because they still have their idols.
They give credit to God, as you'll get to a little bit later. Like in 16, it says that then people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods."
Right.
Well, even the way it's phrased, "Far be it from us to give up God," because God did all those things for us.
Right.
But these other gods are still doing things for us too.
Yeah.
That's a problem that you'll see in Judges.
Yeah. But there's already God. The way it's put to them is you're going to have to get rid of your idols. And of course, what we're inclined to think is, well, boy, they should have gotten rid of those a long time ago. So there is going to be that sense of they're still there with you.
They feel you can credit God for everything that he does and he'll be happy, but you could also credit these others.
Yeah.
And Joshua's pointing out, no, you can't.
Right. And so I think it's important for us to understand that they're at a point where they maybe need to understand something they've really not been able to grasp. That you are really going to be in a right place if you realize that these gods do not exist. But it was very difficult for them to shake that. And we'll go ahead and follow on down here because, let's see, 14, we've already read. Okay, so the people answered, verse 16, and said, "Far be it from us," and that's just been noted already, "that we would abandon the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is" what? "He who brought us and our fathers up and out of the land of Egypt from the house of slaves, and did these great signs in our sight." I mean, they're just making the statement, aren't they? Well, of course we're going to obey God. Of course we're going to put him first. And they, as Larry said, they'll say that, but they haven't really quite grasped the concept. So keep going down here. He says, "Far be it from us that we would abandon the Lord to serve other gods." And then let's skip on down to verse 18. It says, "The Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." And then what does Joshua say to them? I mean, these people are fired up. We are ready to serve God. And what does he say? You're not going to do it, or you're not able to. Right? That's probably a statement that takes some sort of explaining. They're able to do it, but because of who you are, and maybe you haven't made the necessary change to be able to say it's God and only God, then you're just not going to do it. And of course, is that the way it is? Well, they quickly, as someone said, Judges tells you what happened to them over a 400-year period. All right, Robert, quick comment, please.
This is the pattern that will repeat itself. Joshua saw their pledge when the Ten Commandments were brought, and it didn't last a couple of days. This is the repeating of history.
Sure.
And he sees it, and he knows it. And he knows, just like Larry was saying, that this is an all or nothing commitment, and their hearts are still trying to do two things at once.
Right. Yeah.
It is all or nothing, and Joshua knows the people that he has been serving for decades
Yeah.
are not going to be
Well,
able to
actually,
do that.
two generations. In reality, he was there in the beginning with Moses, and then he had to pursue it along in his particular generation. Let's go ahead, and he says, after they say, "We will serve the Lord, for he is our God." Then Joshua said to the people, "You will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God." Meaning, the whole idea of being holy or being separate, you have not really mastered as of yet, to use my phrase, and you can say whatever you want about that. But the reality, he's saying you're not going to do it. And know for one thing, he is a jealous God, and he will not forgive your wrongdoings or your sins. Now, what did he tell them once they got into the land? If they sinned against God and they got back into idolatry, did God say, oh, don't worry, I'll forgive that? Well, I mean, it's not saying that you can't repent of your sins, but the promise, agreement, the covenant that was made with these people was, if you choose not to be faithful to me, then I will do what? I will spew you out of the land. So he's saying, you're not going to succeed. Now, again, this is one of these things, as any of us who teach, and you're trying to teach God's word as it is, and I think sometimes we try to give our own way of sort of making it a little bit easier than probably what God would want, because God does through Joshua. He doesn't make it easy. Again, we should say, all right, now, are we all going to be faithful to God? And then they all would cheer, and then that would be the end of it. And then they'd go on and do the right thing. And that's not the way it happens. And the thing is, God knows, Joshua understood the pattern, like Robert was talking about. The Holy Spirit understands what these people have done and what they're going to do. They'll say, yes, we will obey the law. And they don't do it. All right, so let's keep going here because we're fast running out of time. He says, remember, if you abandon the Lord, verse 20, and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and destroy you after he has done good to you. So understand, he's done a lot of good things for you, and you may think he's just going to keep on doing it that way, but that's not the way it works. If you do good, then he will do good to you, and then if you choose to not do good to him, well then you are going to be in a state of rebellion. So he says, so Joshua said to the people, verse 22, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. Okay, that's what you've said. It's kind of like someone depicted this as kind of like a courtroom scene. He says, now, are you saying? And then, of course, at this point, they'd say, okay, answer yes or no. But the point is, he's saying, you are witnesses against yourselves. You have said, and you have chosen yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, yes, we are witnesses. Now then, do away with the foreign gods which are in your midst. Going back to Larry's point. Okay, right in the middle of all this, they're saying they're going to put God first. But then God says what? Okay, but you're going to have to get rid of these idols. And I think that we've discussed this before. It was the same thing when they left Egypt, right? They took and openly sort of took these idols, little trinkets or whatever they were. I don't know. I like to believe they're kind of obscure and not easily seen, but I can't be sure about that. But the reality is, they just didn't seem to be able to pull themselves away. And there's a lot of lessons there in this, in terms of application, of wanting to do something, but not really totally committed to the concept because of circumstances, in our lives. And that's generally the way we all work. We excuse, I did this, but it was their fault. And it's just our natural way of sort of self-justification. So anyway, he goes, now then do away with the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey his voice. I almost picture Joshua standing here going, I can't believe I'm hearing this. You guys are really fired up, but you're just making me go to sleep. That's just Randyisms right there. So he says, Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. So there's a nice big tree there by the sanctuary, and he puts a marker down there. And we already had a little dispute about the most recent marker. Remember that? Where they put up the guys who went to the other side of the river. They put something right there on the inside, on the west side of it. And of course, they were accused of being idolaters. And then they get together, they discuss it, and they say, no, we just want to be reminded of our relationship with you. Now, if you go back and you start counting these, there's about 7 or 8 different times where they actually put something down and said, okay, because of this, we're going to be remembering. They're there to remember. Okay, so you might say, well, could it be possible that they would worship that thing? Well, I mean, anything's possible. Look at what happens if you are in Jerusalem and you go, Jesus was just born in we always say, it was just a little farm, a little room, just a little place, just born in such an insignificant sort of way. And then people will go over there and worship the possible place. So we know it can be done. And it's very hard, when you go over and you're seeing, okay, well, at least this is something good, Well, in a way, let's just say they were using those idols to sort of, in their mind, draw them closer to God. Would you say, oh, well, that's okay? That's okay. No, God wouldn't look at it that way. Okay, so that stone, he says, behold, this stone shall be a witness, this is verse 27, against us, because it has heard all the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. So now that's kind of, figurative sort of language. He's not saying the rock's going to hear it, but there is a sense in a way that it's going to be there to remind you. I think that would be the situation, wouldn't it? If you walk by it, what are you going to remember? What you said. And so it was for that reason. Now, the closing part of it is Joshua dies and he is buried, and then the son of get down to the grandson or great grandson of Aaron. I think it's probably the grandson, and he dies, and then they bury the bones of Joseph. This is one of the most fascinating things to me. Do you realize how long these bones have been around? It said, they were pretty well taken care of. Where does it say? Where does it say he was in a casket? Okay, I'm waiting for somebody to find it.
It's verse 32, it says they brought him out of Egypt where he's buried in Shechem.
Yeah, okay, where that was, they became an inheritance. Well, I know it's there. They buried the bones which the son of Israel brought up from Egypt at Shechem in the plot of land which Jacob had bought. So this wasn't even Jacob's land. He bought it way back. Do you realize how long ago this was? Yeah, this was 400 plus years since that was done. And it says, he bought the land and it became the inheritance. Oh, I can't find where it says. Where does it say? Oh, they very much.
Are you thinking of when they brought him up from
Yeah.
when they left?
Well, but it's. No, it says.
I didn't catch it in what we read tonight.
Okay, well, maybe that was somewhere else where I read that. Maybe it's back in the Exodus passage I have written down here, but we don't have time to do that. But it was well protected. And they're carrying it all around here at this point. I assume it was sitting somewhere when it was in Egypt, because he was a very significant person. And then, of course, what would happen? Go ahead, Jessica.
He was embalmed, so that helped
Yeah, where did you read that?
Genesis.
Okay, well, there you go. So why didn't you save me 5 minutes ago?
Well, I wasn't certain what you're looking for, but in Genesis, at the end, so Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him and he was put in a coffin.
Yeah. So he was embalmed, and they're kind of known for those sorts of skills. So, well, thanks. That way I don't want people walking out here thinking I'm totally delusional. Thanks. Okay, we'll shut up. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I like your patience with me. I appreciate it very much. And I hope we got something out of it. As we always say when we teach, man, I didn't really know a lot of this stuff. And it's really good for us to, there's so much for us to learn here. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Oh, you're welcome. So what was the length?